Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. That confirmation call has long been held as a safeguard against fraud, but it's not. Let's delve into why and what can improve that process. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 341, Why the Vendor Confirmation Call is Not a Silver Bullet to Avoid Payment Fraud. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about it in two different sections. The first one is challenges in making effective confirmation calls, like why it's not that silver bullet. And I will have 1, 2, 3 of those. And then we're going to talk about in the second section, the ways that you can improve the confirmation call process. And lastly, I'm going to talk about a new toolkit that I have called Vendor Callback Confirmation Toolkit. And it will have some of the things that I'm talking about today and some things that I'm not talking about that you might need to improve your confirmation call process. Get that best practices in, make it standardized, and also have it be audit ready. So let's go ahead and get started with the challenges in making effective confirmation calls. But, first, I do want to just say that I'm still here to this day. Third-party providers, you might hear from insurance companies too, saying just make that simple phone call. And I have been saying for the longest, for those of you that have been listening to my podcast for a while, maybe you've seen me speak in real life, been on webinars, that confirmation call is definitely not simple. As a matter of fact, fraudsters have become very adept, right, at evolving the tactics that mislead, right, those verifications. And a big one, and this is not even one of the challenges, but a big thing that they have started to do that is really an evolving tactic against the confirmation call is they will now send a request to change the contact information weeks before, months before, right, sending that request to change the remittance information. And so that means that when you make that confirmation call, you're going to be calling them. And what's very scary about that is those of you, and I know I've been in that position too, where you didn't have vendor contact information in the first place. And so you were actually very happy to get that email saying, here, update or add my contact information. And so that step, you're not necessarily confirming anything. You're just happy to get it, and you'll get it and you'll update it. And so for anyone though that has
been in my vendor setup and maintenance process workshop, or if you purchase the AVM vendor toolkit, or maybe you have the training pass. One of my documents templates is a vendor setup form template. It's actually the substitute W-9 form, but it's a vendor setup form. And that template, though, has a second page for modification of information, and that means that for a change of remittance or adding remittance, yes, I know it's obstacles in the way. It's a lot of stuff to do, but you know what? You need to put those obstacles in the way of these frosters. But have them fill out, right, that vendor setup form. And on page 2 is if they have a modification of information like contact information, they have to give the previous contact information as well. So it's putting a standardized process around accepting contact information. And that is definitely needed now because we know that fraudsters are trying to get their information for contacting them, telephone, email address on the vendor record, so that when they send that request to change, you're going to contact them. All right. So now with that being said, let's talk about the 3 challenges I see in making effective confirmation calls. So the first one is what I just talked about, no or bad contact information. So the problem is that when the vendor information is collected for vendor setup or for submitting changes, often the contact information for the vendor team members that they need to confirm remittance changes is just not collected. The contact information that either the internal team members that contact that they are working with is usually collected, or maybe if it's a PO vendor, the contact that the purchasing team or procurement team, the buyer is working with, is collected. Also, when a search for this information is done, the applicable contact information is removed from the vendor's website. So if you go and look for the vendor's website, maybe you do have it. The FTC, though, and I've been saying it too, the Federal Trade Commission has said do not search for the vendor website on Google, any of the search engines, because the fraudsters have SEO and paid ads with these impersonated websites. But anyway, if you do find it, or maybe you have it on file, then you go to their site for the contact information that you need to verify remittance information. And they pulled it down because they themselves are afraid of fraud. The fraudsters will contact them and try to pretext their remittance information out of them. So it's a lot of times it's gone. And then also, fraudsters know the confirmation call is required. And again, they have that new workaround. And actually, it was a part of my list. So, of that. The fact that they're sending the change request or the contact information ahead of the change request for remittance details was on my list. All right. The next thing is that the vendors don't pick up the phone when the calls are made. It's hard to contact these vendors. Again, it is not simple. So when the confirmation call is made, it's made to a contact. It could be made to a contact that's not even responsible for confirmation remittance information, or the vendors can just be too busy to take calls, leading to missed confirmations. A lot of times, even if it's legitimate, they'll submit that request depending on the type of vendor you have, and then they're off doing vendor things. They're not waiting around for your call. And so, a lot of you, right, because you have identified, or maybe you've been told not to leave voice messages, you're just stuck trying to catch the vendor at their desk or on their cell phone. And then another reason they don't pick up is it could be because of time zone differences, not just, within the US with like Pacific time and maybe Eastern time, that has that 3 hour difference, but also they could be in different countries too. And so those time zones can be drastic. And so you right, have difficulty contacting the vendor when they should be in their office in order to do the confirmation. Now, the third thing here is even when you do have the right contact information and when the vendor does pick up, the confirmation is not valid. Now, you're probably thinking, why would the confirmation not be valid, Deborah? Well, to avoid fraud, some vendors have instructed the contacts, the AR team, that confirming remittance changes when they receive those requests to not confirm them via phone, because if you think about it from their point of view, they have no idea who you are either. And so they have been, the accounts receivable team or whoever is responsible for it has been told or have been told not to confirm via phone. So, now what? Also, it cannot be, that confirmation call may not be valid because authenticating questions such as providing existing banking information or the vendor's tax identification number are just not being asked to verify that the confirmation is from a vendor contact and not from a fraudster. Because if that, let's say that scenario where the fraudster was able to get their contact information updated on the vendor record, even if you call them and if you ask those authenticating questions, then you might catch the fact that they are a fraudster. And typically, when you push back and ask those type of questions and the fraudsters don't know, they'll just hang up. But if you don't ask them, then they're definitely going to approve the change, which means that the confirmation call is not valid. So I have those three reasons and why there are challenges in making effective confirmation calls. I'm sure you may have more. There have been a couple of examples that I have seen in press releases where the confirmation calls have been made or have been instructed to be made, and there were still fraudulent payments made even after the confirmation call was made or the confirmation call was required to be made. But guess what? It just didn't happen. I probably should have put that as a reason. But anyway, I'm sure you have some additional reasons as well why the reasons for challenges in making effective confirmation calls, not just the three that I have there or that I've just mentioned. And so now let's talk about improving the confirmation call process. So I would recommend that you start with collecting and maintaining valid contact information because that's where it all starts. So, at the time of vendor setup or when updating existing vendor information, if you didn't do it right at the time of vendor setup, maybe you inherited the database, maybe you're just starting this process now, request the vendor contact information from the applicable internal team member. So this can be the buyer from purchasing or the internal team member for non-purchase order vendors. So make sure you are collecting the right vendor contact at the time of vendor setup or when updating vendor information. They can still collect the contact information of the person that they need. I mean, it's great to have multiple contacts anyway, but you definitely need to make sure you have the one for confirmation calls. And what I suggest is to create a separate form or include fields on an existing vendor form to collect valid vendor contact information. And so you want to label that too, if you can, to make sure you have their AR contact or the contact that can confirm changes on the vendor record. Now, the second thing is to use confirmation call scripts. So, have an introduction in the script to explain the reason for the call and make sure you include your name, the name of the company, and also the name of the team member at the vendor's place of business that requested the service or product or that submitted the remittance request. So, this may help that scenario where, right, they don't know who you are either. It could help give the vendor contact that information to recognize that the request you're calling, right, is legitimate. Also include fraud prevention questions such as the last 5 digits of the existing bank routing number and the last 5 digits of the existing bank account number as authentication questions, for example, if they are asking for a bank change. And if there's new, and then also confirm the new banking information by asking the last 5 digits of the new bank routing number and the last 5 digits of the new bank account number. Um, as fraud prevention, but also make sure there were no errors when the new banking was submitted because somebody may have fat fingered it. Also, you want to make sure you include language for a graceful exit if the confirmation attempt was not valid. Now, I actually have podcast episodes where I went through 5 confirmation scripts, and they are episodes 315 to 319. And so I'm giving you 5 confirmation call scripts that you can use. However, in the vendor uh, confirmation call or callback confirmation toolkit, I have 10 different scripts. So again, I'll give you some more information on that at the end. All right. And so now we've talked about the confirmation call scripts. Now let's go to the third one. And I had 4 of these, right? So the third one is document your confirmation call attempts. So create a log to track them all and to make sure that you know the status of each. Again, because the vendors don't pick up all the time. So you need to make sure management too, right, needs to make sure where you are at with all of the outstanding changes because for pending confirmation calls, right, those things are at risk if, especially if it's valid. So if you have not confirmed the change request, and so you've not made the change in the system, now you are susceptible to sending that payment out to an old bank account information, for example, and now it's going to be that payment is going to come back, be unsuccessful, and now you've got rework to do. Same thing with checks too, because the check can be returned. And so you do need to make sure you're keeping track of what's still outstanding. And what I recommend is that you do, right, additional research so that you are balancing, right, the need of uh, confirming that change with maybe payments to strategic vendors, that type of thing. So you do may need to do some additional research if those pending calls go beyond a certain time period. Now, I will tell you, I got asked a question about, well, how many times should we call before we just kind of give up? Well, you can't really give up because, again, if it's legitimate, now you may have payments being returned. And if it's not legitimate, you definitely don't want to make the change anyway because you weren't supposed to or you weren't able to confirm it. You have to continue and find another way to resolve that issue. And that's kind of, that is not kind of, but is what I go through in the vendor callback confirmation toolkit, where I have a desktop procedure that talks about what to do, like the next steps when you just can't reach that vendor. All right. The next thing, the fourth thing here is to document the confirmation call process. And I just kind of talked about that with that desktop procedure. You do want one so that all team members are following the same process. Also, a documented procedure can be audited, which will help to ensure the team members will continue to follow the process, especially if you've had like a fraud attempt or a fraudulent payment. And so now you're making sure that you put this into place and everyone's kind of doing it because it's all fresh in their minds. But then you get, a few months out, you get to a busy period, get to year end, and, it's not as fresh and nothing else has happened since then. So the team may or or may not continue to do that process. They're on to other things that may be hot at the moment. And so you want to make sure that they continue to do that process that you put into place to avoid fraud. And so an audit is a great way to do that. But in order to have an auditable process, it has to be a documented process. And then another thing I recommend you do is to make decisions such as how many attempts will be made before additional steps are required, and document those steps. And I kind of just talked about it with when I talked about the next steps when someone or you're not able to reach the vendor. So those are the things. So I talked about it in two different sections. One's challenges in making effective confirmation calls. And there were three things under there: no or bad vendor contact information. Also, vendors don't pick up the phone when calls are made. And then also, even when you have the right contact information and the vendor picks up, the confirmation is not valid. And then under the second section, improving the confirmation call process, I had four things. One, collect and maintain valid contact information for the vendor, use confirmation call scripts, document confirmation call attempts, and then document the confirmation call process. Now, if you would like all of that in a toolkit, I've actually built one. It's called the Vendor Callback Confirmation Toolkit, and it includes an implementation guide along with a desktop procedure that has a best practice process already developed for you. You can customize it, but it is a best practice process documented. I also have a process map where it shows that process visually. And then I have scripts. Again, there are 10 scripts included. So the scripts include payment confirmation scripts as well, and that's part of the process. And then the last thing I have is a log where I identify or give you columns I think that need to be included, along with kind of a built-in number of contacts to make before you start reviewing it for what should we do now. So if you're interested in that, I will have a link to it in the show notes. All right, so I hope this provided some valuable content for you because, confirmation calls can be a vital part of preventing B2B payment fraud. Uh, but you do have to make sure that it's being done right, especially if you're not the one doing it. You need to put a standardized process in place, make sure it's a best practice process to avoid fraud, and then make sure it's auditable. All right, so thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 341st episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.